Hello and welcome to IBM Developer. I'm your host, Luke Shantz. In this episode of our Origin Stories interview series, I'm pleased to bring you a conversation with Jaya Ramanathan. She's an experienced security and governance architect and one of the keynote speakers at IBM's upcoming Cloud Native Security Conference. Thanks for taking time to talk with us today, Jaya.
Hi, Luke. Thank you for the opportunity for this interview. I'm really excited to be here. So just to tell a little bit about myself, I recently moved to Red Hat and became a Red Hatter beginning of March this year. And my role currently is I'm the Chief Security and Governance Architect for the Red Hat Advanced Cluster Management for Kubernetes offering. And prior to that, I was actually with IBM for almost 28 years. And I worked on various aspects of security within IBM, both in the IBM Security Business Unit, as well as in IBM Cloud and hybrid cloud organizations. So I'm really excited right now. My passion is about governance, which is what my topic is also going to be about, the one I'm going to talk about. And so happy to be here.
Well, I think that's a great place to start the conversation. For folks who don't know what governance is, maybe even there, right? Like, what does that mean? What's governance?
Yeah. So governance is obviously a broad term, but in the context of what I'm talking about, I refer to governance in the context of security and compliance. So if you think about many of our enterprise customers who are doing the transformation from their traditional IT infrastructure to cloud, many of them are in highly regulated industries like finance, banking, healthcare, federal government, etc. And for those customers, meeting the security and compliance requirements is extremely important. And that is one of the things they always worry about, when they think about moving to cloud. And one of the things, based on my experience, since, I was in IBM Cloud for 4 years, working as the security architect there. And then I also worked in hybrid cloud where I was delivering private cloud solutions. My experience in offering managed cloud offerings where we had to take care of security and compliance aspects, led me to realize that putting proper procedures, processes, and automation in place is the right approach to ensuring that something is configured properly, right? And so governance is essentially that. It is essentially letting you define a set of policies to conform to best practices on how the various controls within your environment are configured. And these controls could pertain to security. They could also pertain to software engineering, resiliency, and other aspects. So typically, if you look at any enterprise client, they're looking at standards that they have to comply to, whether it is external standards like PCI or HIPAA or FISMA, or their own internal enterprise standards, right? And what we really want to do here is to make it easy. And how do you make it easy? Because typically, if you look at a particular security control, there are security SMEs who know exactly how that control works. I'm talking about, things like data in transit encryption, for example, right? So the person who is familiar with the technology will know how to configure it, how it should be set up, what ciphers to use, make sure TLS of 1.3 is used, things like that, right? But if you're thinking about an ops person who is responsible for running this environment, right? They may not necessarily be an SME in every aspect of security, okay? So how do you make this easy? The way you make it easy is you add this governance capability into the control itself, and you define a set of policies that conform to the best practices. And so deploying those policies becomes like a push button kind of automation, right? So that's really the whole idea behind this governance that I'm really passionate about, because when I was in IBM Cloud, I did have my team build a little mini GRC dashboard for me. And so this whole idea came about through that. And then when I came over to hybrid cloud and we released the Cloud Pack for Multi-Cloud Manager offering, this GRC capability was built into that. And then now we have moved that piece into Red Hat. So as part of my move to Red Hat, I came over along with this technology, and we are incorporating this technology into Red Hat right now.
Interesting. And I'm imagining, or let's say the stereotype historical view is like security was always like an afterthought, or it's like, oh, it's just a firewall. But now, especially with hybrid model, I mean, there's such a huge surface area that's vulnerable. It's like you need to think about it up front. It has to be the core of what you're doing, or you're really vulnerable in this modern architectures.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is why, my view is governance has to be applied across the entire stack. By that, I mean, starting from the hardware, establishing the root of trust, all the way to the operating system, to the container platform, to the middleware, and finally on to the workload that is running on top of it. And so that you make sure that all layers are set up properly to best practices, right? So this is where, the security controls at the various layers are automated and enabled so that you know where the issues are, you have visibility, you can trigger remediation through automated actions. And so I think that's extremely important. That's the only way to actually manage this. Otherwise, it's not scalable.
It totally makes sense. And I want to come back to this topic, but because this origin series is really about, the paths that developers and technologists take in their whole career, I'd like to, rewind and ask you, what was the impetus? What really, was it that math class or the graphing calculator or the ham radio? If we rewind it back to your, your childhood or your adolescence, when did that spark happen that set you on the path you're on today?
That's a good question. I think for me, I was always interested in problem solving and math. It was always fascinating. So I think naturally, when I was progressing through my high school and I had an option of either pursuing the STEM engineering path or pursuing either commerce or going into medicine, the choice for me was very clear that I am going to get into STEM and I'm going to become an engineer. So it was very clear. And, of course, when I was studying engineering, computer science was just beginning at that time. Because computers then were still in locked away in rooms where only a few people were, were able to get to them. And you had to wear some slippers to make sure, it is dust free and, things like that, right? So, but I was introduced to computers during my engineering degree because they had a computer mainframe there. And my first programming language, if I remember right, was BASIC. So I remember writing some basic programs at that time. That's where my journey began in computers.
Interesting. And so I'm imagining then, starting when computers were very rare, and the developer or the programmer is, sort of like you're saying, locked away in the closet. No one knows where they are. They're in the back room, and now we have this world where all the developers are on Twitter and have opinions. So from there, what was your first job? Was it at IBM, or was it did you start somewhere else?
No, it was not at IBM. I actually grew up in India. So I did my bachelor's in India, and then I also did my master's from Indian Institute of Technology in Mumbai, India. And in my master's is when I first ventured into computer science. My bachelor's was actually in electronics and communications. But then when I went to do my master's, initially, I got admission to electronics and communications for master's as well. But then opening opened up for computer science. And so they were asking, who is interested, right? So I put my hand up, and I was one of the 3 people who got transferred into the computer science department. So rest is history, I guess. So that's where I started. And there I kind of learned Pascal was the programming language I learned there. And I used to do assignments on punched cards, and, it was interesting. And so then after that, I worked for a couple of years in India. And I actually worked on automated communication box. It was called Automex. It was actually software that was routing messages to among different destinations. And so I basically had to write the software and then burn it into a programmable ROM and put it into the device. So that's what I did there. But then I was really fascinated by the opportunities that United States of America presented, right? So I wrote my GRE and then I applied and then I got admission for PhD in computer science at Michigan State University. So I landed in Michigan in spring, thankfully. So I had all the different seasons that I enjoyed. Spring, summer, fall, and Michigan is beautiful. You have all these different variations of colors and everything, and so I had a lot of time to adjust before winter hit, and so it was fine. So anyway, during my PhD is when I had an opportunity to do internship at IBM TJ Watson Research Center in Hawthorne, New York. And I essentially did a project on the Mark microkernel. And Mark was a microkernel that originated at Carnegie Mellon, and IBM was looking at it. And so my internship was on that. And that was my first intro to IBM. And I really liked the company and the atmosphere and everything. And so when I graduated, I applied to IBM, various IBM locations. I got an offer from IBM Austin, and I moved to Austin. And I've been in Austin since then. Been a while, since 1992.
Probably seen a lot of changes in Austin, I'm imagining. It's a boom town now.
It's a boom town. It's a very vibrant city. We really like it here. And so I've been in IBM since then. And initially I was working on a project related to my thesis. So it was on distributed systems, clustering, the Mark operating system, the kernel, microkernel, etc. And then a few years later is when I got the opportunity to work on security. So since 2000, I've been working in the security area.
That's interesting that you were thinking about distributed systems like very early on, because obviously now that's the name of the game. We've got all this containerization, we've got edge. Do you have any sort of insights or interesting thing of like, wow, I really watched this blossom or progress?
Yeah, it's very interesting because if I think about it, initially, computers were just locked away, right? Very few people were managing them, etc. Right? And then we saw the blossom of personal computing, where everybody was able to get a desktop to begin with, right? And then what happened is it became a little more complicated, because even lay people who had the desktop had to deal with how to keep it up to date. How do you make sure that the antivirus software is running, firewalls are in place, all those things that they had to deal with, right? So, and then the interesting thing is, then we see the shift with the cloud. We see that the devices that most people use are very simple, like the iPhone and the iPad, and you find that we are back to where we started, which is most of the management is being done in the cloud by a certain select few, right? And whereas the mass population is getting the benefits of being able to use it, right? Which is what they should be doing. And then you're leaving the management to the few. And I think where I am going with my work, my current work, is to help those people who are managing the cloud, right? Provide them the right tools so that they can manage it from a security and compliance perspective in a easier manner.
And so I'm sure a lot of our listeners are familiar with hybrid cloud, but maybe some aren't. And I think it might be worth spending a few minutes just to talk about, what does that mean from a security perspective? So first, what is hybrid cloud, and then sort of how do you approach hybrid cloud from a security perspective?
Yeah. So hybrid cloud so when cloud first began, the focus was more on public cloud, right? Which is, think of it as more multi-tenant, which means it caters to multiple customers, and each customer gets an account, and then they can provision VMs and containers and run their applications, etc., use services on the cloud, etc., right? That was fine for experimentation and, for applications that are not as sensitive, right? But once you start looking at more highly regulated industries and, regulated workloads and so on, customers wanted more control over how the cloud is managed, right? So that's when private cloud came about, where we said, okay, we will give you the same technology, Kubernetes and container platforms that has the benefits of elasticity, ease of management, deployability, etc. But we will give it to you within your enterprise, so you can manage it to whatever standards you need to manage it, right? So we put the power back into the customer, or the control back into the customer. But then, that's also another extreme, right? So really what customers are looking for is they have different kinds of workloads. For some, they want to keep it within the perimeter of their enterprise. Others, they're willing to run on the public cloud. Plus, they also have data sitting within their enterprise in existing systems that they have to integrate with, right? So that's the hybrid cloud. So the hybrid cloud is essentially a combination of public, private, and your existing IT infrastructure, right? So that your application, business application, is actually spanning all three. Because you may want to put a marketing app onto public cloud. You may keep your data within your enterprise, and then you you run your analytics application and things like that on private cloud within your enterprise. That's one example. So hybrid is essentially, think of it as a combination of all three, right? One of the things Red Hat also is pushing, the concept Red Hat pushes a lot, is called open hybrid cloud. So what do we mean by that? We mean we want to be open, meaning the Red Hat way is the open source way, right? So you want to open source the source for all the technologies in the offerings that you deliver. So it becomes a lot easier for anybody to contribute, and also customers are not tied to some proprietary technology, right? So the open hybrid cloud is the way to go from our perspective, and I've seen that from many customers as well, right? Where they basically say, I don't want any proprietary technology, right? Give me something that is open source, but give it to me with the proper support, security, resiliency, right? So that's what they want us to do, right? But they want the technology itself to be open source. And that's really what Red Hat does with its container technology, the OpenShift, as well as the one I'm working on, Red Hat Advanced Cluster Management. We are actually open sourcing it through the Open Cluster Management project. It's not fully there yet, but we have taken steps to open source, and eventually it will be completely open sourced.
I want to get to the transition from IBM to Red Hat, but first I'd like to ask you about that journey within the enterprise, because I noticed in my research that you've had many roles. So I'd like to maybe ask you about what was that journey within the enterprise like, from a personal career perspective. Like, you came in with one role, but then you were able to, throughout your career, change that. I imagine as the industry changes, but also probably as your interests change.
Yeah, that's a good question. Like I said, right, I started off in distributed systems and clustering, and then I moved on to security in 2000. So when I first started in security, security, if you think about it, it's a very broad area, right? So there's so many different aspects of security. So I had the opportunity to work on various different aspects. So like roughly every 4 years or so, I was working on a different project. Okay. Still in the security business unit, but I got to work on, for example, I started with access management. Then I did some work on auditing and reporting. Then I did some work on compliance, right? Then I even dabbled at something called integration initiative, where I focused on security aspects, where if you have multiple products, because IBM was acquiring some products from other companies. When you acquire these different products, each one has its own way of doing things, right? From a security perspective, UI perspective, etc. But if you look at a customer, they're trying to use all these products together. And so the deployment was becoming a pain point. So one of the things we looked at was how do we make it simpler? And I was leading the security integration initiative. So we built some technologies to help with the integration so that's more seamless for customers. And then I spent some time in a client-facing role where I was part of a solution architecture team working on security solutions for customers. This is basically, taking our security products and then putting together a solution architecture that tells customers how they would deploy it, how they would manage it, etc. Right? I did that for a couple of years, and then I realized that my passion is in development. So I came back to development and started working on identity management. So anyway, the bottom line is since I kind of changed my project every 4 years, over a period of time, I had acquired a lot of different security skills in very many security areas, right? So then when IBM got into cloud, and they were providing a public cloud, which was managed by IBM, which means it had to be enabled for all the security aspects. And that is when I was given the opportunity to come and join and be the security architect. And because I had dabbled with all the different aspects of security, and I had also done some client-facing stuff. So it seemed like, it was a good opportunity. And it used to be called Bluemix at the time, IBM Cloud. And so I was the Bluemix security architect for the platform. It was very exciting. For me, working on Bluemix was like working for a startup within IBM. So it was very fast-paced, and I learned so much in those 4 years. And it was very exciting.
Little side note, I came into IBM through an acqui-hire of SoftLayer, but before that, I was an early adopter of Bluemix and SoftLayer infrastructure as a service at a startup. And I think I remember the night, it was like I saw a blog post about some Watson services. I was like signed up right away and, got connected with some, developer advocate types back then. And, but yeah, very exciting time when all that stuff started becoming available in the cloud for the first time. It felt like you mentioned, like those things that were locked away now are starting to become available. And it's grown and it's become so robust now.
Yep. So yeah, go ahead.
Well, continue if you have another thought there.
No, the only other thing was, so then I moved just to complete the progression, right? So from public cloud, IBM offered dedicated cloud, which is public cloud was for multiple tenants. So multiple clients were using the same infrastructure, etc. Dedicated was dedicated just for the tenant. So it's more a dedicated offering. So I worked on security for that. And then some customers really wanted a cloud within their enterprise. So we came up with an offering called Local. So Local Bluemix was the third offering I worked on. So security aspects of that. But it was still managed by IBM. But then there were some customers who said, give me my cloud, but let me manage it, right? So that's when private cloud was born. So IBM Cloud Private was the other one I worked on. And then after that, we realized pretty soon that a customer is not just buying one cloud deployment, right? They're going to have multiple. And we need a way to manage those. So that's how Multi-Cloud Manager was born. So I was working on the security aspects of that. And that is where the idea of incorporating the GRC concept that I talked about, which I actually used in IBM Cloud, making that as a product capability in Multi-Cloud Manager, so that I knew that customers have to manage and deal with the same set of things I dealt with when I was part of the managed offering. So putting that capability into the product will give the customer the tool to do that. So that's how that GRC concept came about. And yeah, so essentially, if you think about it, think about my career progression. After spending around 15 years or so in security business unit, I moved over to cloud, and then I essentially have followed IBM's cloud journey, right? So public, dedicated, local, private, multi, hybrid. And then IBM went and acquired Red Hat. And essentially Red Hat became our strategic container platform. So now I'm working on that management of that. So I feel like I've been following IBM's cloud journey, which is kind of exciting.
That is exciting. And I think it might be interesting to delve a little bit into the, well, two-part question here. So folks have the context of understanding, because I know, people saw in the news IBM Red Hat, one of the largest acquisitions ever, but there's a bit of a firewall there and this very unique relationship. And I think it might be good to talk about, sort of what is that relationship and why did it happen? Because, I wasn't really aware of the long history of actually working together in such a common customer base. It really was something that, a progression that developed over time, a great working relationship. So, so I think that's the first part of the question is, hey, how does that, work? And then the second part would be, your particular, decision to say, hey, I've done this, I know all of that, it's time to make the move over here.
Yeah, good questions. I think for the first one, IBM and Red Hat have been working together for a long time, right? If you think about Linux, right? In the Linux space, that relationship has been there for a while, right? And then when it came to cloud, I think what happened is we had the IBM Cloud Private, which was essentially competing with the Red Hat OpenShift offering. Both of them are Kubernetes-based private cloud offerings, right? Container platforms. I think we got to the point where it made more sense to not compete on the same set of technologies, but rather, by IBM acquiring Red Hat, we could then focus the efforts within IBM Hybrid Cloud on the middleware layer, right? Because if you think about it, IBM has been in the middleware business for so many years now, right? In fact, if you look at what we are now calling as cloud packs, all these cloud packs are essentially IBM middleware, which is now packaged as a cloud offering, right, on top of the container platform. So I think it made sense to, rather than compete, otherwise, we would be delivering the same capabilities in private cloud, Red Hat will be doing the same thing, and it just didn't make sense to kind of compete. Also, I think the container platform over a period of time may get commoditized too, right? So I think where the differentiator is going to be in how it is managed from a resiliency, security, support, perspective, and also all the middleware. Because whenever I talk to enterprise customers, right, like I told you about that customer who said, give me an open source database, but give it to me with resiliency, security, and support, right? So that's just one example. Any customer who is building a business application and wants to move to cloud requires those core services, whether it's the messaging service, a database service. Those are things that they need, and analytics for AI, things like that, right? So without that, they can't really adopt cloud, because otherwise they will have to deal with all that, right? And so I think it made sense for IBM and Red Hat to join hands so that, we can have Red Hat continue focusing on the container platform because they're more close to the hardware and the operating system. That's their expertise, right? And then IBM software hybrid cloud can focus on the services. the software services for the various middleware pieces. So I think it made sense. And then, obviously we have customers on both sides, and now, we can leverage the customer base on both sides as well, which we are doing. To answer the second part of your question, I think for me, like I said, I've been pretty much following IBM's cloud journey. And I think for me, I realized that what I really enjoy doing is working on cutting edge technology and delivering products, offerings to the market, and collaboration. I really enjoy the collaboration with IBM research and the third-party vendors, etc. Right? So, so for me, the move to Red Hat was perfect because it is giving me the opportunity to take this governance idea, which is my current passion, and bring it to the open source community. And because the only way we will really realize the vision of governance is if we apply it across the entire stack, across all the controls. Now, if you think about that, right, different layers of the stack are owned by different people, or different companies even, right? And even the controls are owned by different companies. So if you take a customer who is, say, bought OpenShift and they want to secure it, right? So they would use some of the existing OpenShift security capabilities, but they will also use partner capabilities. OpenShift has a big partner ecosystem so now if I want to make sure that all those security controls are configured properly and I want to apply governance to it, right? Red Hat won't be able to do all that on their own, right? We have to go and collaborate with all these different partners. So we have to collaborate in the open source community to make this happen. So for me, I'm excited because I feel I'm in the right spot, because the topic or the area where what I'm passionate about, I'm now able to bring it to open source and now work with, various third parties and IBM research and various teams within Red Hat also, who own the various layers of the stack and realize that vision.
That's very interesting. And I think that sort of brings us to present day. And then my next question would be, how is AI fit into the security space?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think AI, right now, the focus is more on specific targeted industry segments, right? So whether it is healthcare or some of these other industry focus areas for AI, right? So that is at the, I would say, application software level, right? But I think moving forward, I can imagine AI being part of everything, in the sense that it becomes another attribute, right? So because I can see that, like even when I use my cell phone, right? Some of the things that I see, I say, how did that work, because it's kind of learning, right? And it's applying what it's learning to make the tool easier for us, right? So I think AI is going to become very prevalent across pretty much all aspects. And from a security perspective, I think AI fits in really well with the governance thing that I'm talking about. In fact, one of the themes I have that I would like to pursue further is the what I'm calling it as intelligence, building intelligence into how we apply the policies and how do you fine tune the policies, right? Because you may define a policy and you may customize it, and it may work well or maybe it may not. How do you So part of the thing is to kind of gather the data of, what worked well, what didn't, do some root cause analysis, fine tune the policies. So I think all those aspects, applying AI techniques to that data is definitely an area I'll be looking at.
So my last question for you is a bit of a wild card, which is there anything I didn't ask you that I should have, or anything that just comes to mind that you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I think one of the things I just wanted to say here is what inspired me on my journey here. I would say, definitely my parents were a big inspiration. Both my parents, really inculcated the value of education and, uh, it being the foundation for things. And I know my mom really encouraged me to be very independent and make my own decisions, and which I've always valued. And my dad was I remember he wrote a message for me once in which he said he wrote uh, to seek, strive, and not yield. So I think that really, I've been kind of following those values, right? So I just wanted to share that. The other thing is the things that inspired me have been a lot of women in many different fields, not just computer science, right? Where they have kind of worked their way up and in many ways, cracked the glass ceiling. And whenever I see a woman who has done that, it doesn't matter what area, what field they did that in, right? It's pretty inspiring. It could be, in business, it could be in law, it could be, uh, maybe they did got on top of Mount Everest, whatever it is, right? It's pretty inspiring. I think that definitely inspired me a lot. The other thing I wanted to share is mentors, importance of mentors. And I had the opportunity to have a lot of different mentors along my way, and they were very helpful. And I'm not going to sit here and reel out names, but they know who they are, and I'm pretty thankful. And that is one of the things I really enjoy doing in my job, which is mentoring. And I have a lot of mentees, and I keep in touch with them. And so for the young people out there who hopefully are listening to this interview, I think I would say definitely seek out mentors. Because I think that really helps you in terms of your career, and 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 hopefully, you'll get inspired like I did by others, and progress your career.
Thank you. That was really heartening, and it's great to hear the cultural and the real, the human side of it. It's not just all the the technology that's relevant, right? It's the connection between people, and like you're saying, this the fabric, right? Like folks who helped you, and then in turn you have these relationships as well. This is thank you.
Can I add a couple more things?
Absolutely.
I just wanted to, I was planning to say this at the end, which is one of the things I also get inspired by is by the younger generation, because I look at the younger generation, and many of them look up to me as a role model, and I think that also inspires me, and including my children. And Also, I think I was fortunate to have a spouse, Ram, who was very, very supportive of me in my career, and that we managed to pull it off, I think. So I think that was it was nice to have a good balance of career and personal life and everything. So
it's also nice to hear that, because I think, many times it seems like it's an either or, but there's a way of doing it, right? And I'm sure it's not easy all the time, but it can be done.
It can be done. And in my case, I did ramp up and ramp down as needed during my career, depending upon my personal needs at the time. So, and it's possible. It's it's obviously it's a personal decision, but it is possible.
Let me ask you: are your children interested in the technology, or are they having a different career path?
They are. In fact, my daughter is aerospace engineer, and she's up in Seattle working for Boeing.
Wow.
And my son actually is in computer science. He's still in college. So yeah, so they are in technology.
Well, this is a very exciting era for aerospace, definitely. I mean, we are seeing an explosion of innovation in that area.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It was nice to see the launch of the astronauts into the International Space Station. That was pretty exciting.
Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. It's been a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to hearing your talk at the conference.
Thank you, Luke. Thank you very much. Have a good evening.
You too.